What if one AI assistant was not enough anymore? What if instead of asking one model to do everything, you deployed a whole swarm? One agent to plan, one to research, one to write, one to code, one to verify, one to watch for mistakes, and one more to coordinate the rest. That is the shift people are starting to notice. We are moving away from the era of the single chatbot and into something much more powerful and a little more unsettling. AI agent swarms. Not one brain, a team. A system where multiple AI agents work in parallel, split up the problem, hand tasks to each other, check each other Eurotrade's work, and try to move faster than any single model could alone. And on paper, it sounds almost unbeatable. More speed, more coverage, more specialization, more output. But once you look closer, deploying an AI agent swarm is not just about getting more done. It is about building a machine made of smaller machines and hoping the coordination layer is smarter than the chaos it creates. That is where things get interesting. Because the dream of an AI swarm is incredibly seductive. You give the top-level objective once, the planner breaks it apart, sub-agents branch off, researchers search in parallel, writers draft, analysts compare options, coders implement, reviewers critique, one manager agent pulls it all back together. Suddenly it feels less like using software and more like commanding a digital workforce. That is why people get excited. A single assistant can be helpful, a swarm feels like leverage. And in some tasks, that leverage is real. If the job is broad, messy, and full of parallel paths, a swarm can outperform a single agent very quickly. That is one of the biggest reasons these systems are taking off. Research is a perfect example. A single AI can only really think down one path at a time. Maybe it checks one angle, then another, but a swarm can split the problem instantly. One agent looks at technical sources, another checks policy, another summarizes competitors, another hunts for contradictions, another condenses the findings. Instead of one long search, you get many simultaneous investigations. That is not just faster, it changes the shape of the work. And that is why companies building advanced AI systems have been moving in this direction. The logic is simple. Once intelligence reaches a certain threshold, the next level of capability comes from coordination. Not one smart agent doing everything, many agents doing different things well. It is almost the same pattern humans discovered a long time ago. A genius working alone can do amazing things, but a coordinated team can build cities, companies, aircraft, operating systems, intelligence networks, and global logistics. The same principle is now creeping into AI. Collective machine effort. That is the promise. But now we get to the part people gloss over. Deploying an AI agent swarm is also where the neat demo starts turning into engineering reality. Because every extra agent adds capability, but it also adds failure points. More context to track, more prompts, more tool calls, more chances to misunderstand the task, more chances to duplicate work, more chances to drift off target, more chances for one bad assumption to get amplified across the system. This is the core tension. A swarm can be more powerful than a single agent, it can also be dramatically more chaotic. You are not just managing intelligence anymore, you are managing coordination. And coordination is where systems either become impressive or become ridiculous. Because a bad swarm does not feel like a team, it feels like 7 interns talking over each other, with admin access. One agent researches the wrong thing, another writes based on outdated context, another confidently checks the wrong answer, the manager merges everything into a polished-looking mess. And if the system is fast enough, it can fail at scale before anyone notices. That is why orchestration matters so much. In a serious agent swarm, the structure is everything. Who is allowed to delegate? Who is allowed to use tools? Which agents can talk to which other agents? When does a task branch out? When does it collapse back inward? What gets reviewed? What gets approved? What gets thrown away? Without those rules, a swarm is not really a system. It is just distributed confusion. This is why a lot of the serious architecture work around multi-agent AI focuses less on flashy output and more on patterns. Sequential flows, concurrent branches, handoffs, group coordination, centralized orchestration, role-based delegation. That sounds dry until you realize those patterns decide whether your swarm becomes a productivity engine or a very expensive hallucination factory. And that brings us to the real reason this topic matters right now. Because people are starting to understand that the future of AI is not just better models, it is better systems around models. That means memory, tooling, evaluation, task decomposition, context management, governance, permissions, observability. The model is not the whole product anymore. The model is one part of an operational stack. Once you deploy a swarm, you stop thinking like a chatbot user. You start thinking like an operator. And operators have a different mindset. They do not ask, can it answer? They ask, can it coordinate? Can it recover from errors? Can it stay on task? Can it prove what it did? Can it avoid infinite loops? Can it stop weak agents from poisoning the result? Can it escalate uncertainty instead of hiding it? Those are much tougher questions, and they are the ones that matter in the real world. Because the more powerful the swarm becomes, the more damage it can do when it is wrong. A single bad answer from one chatbot is annoying. A whole swarm confidently generating bad research, broken code, fake analysis, and polished nonsense at machine speed is a different category of problem. That is why verification agents are becoming so important. Not just makers, checkers, critics, auditors, agents whose entire job is to challenge the others. That is a fascinating shift. The future AI stack may not just be smart agents producing output. It may be smart agents watching other smart agents, trying to stop them from being dangerously convincing. In other words, the swarm does not just need workers, it needs immune systems. And once you see it that way, the whole idea becomes much more real. Deploying an AI agent swarm is not like installing a chatbot. It is closer to launching a miniature organization. You need roles, escalation paths, boundaries, review loops, decision rights, logging, fallbacks, and above all, clarity about who does what. Because the moment every agent can do everything, the system usually gets worse, not better. That is another big lesson people keep relearning. Specialization matters. The strongest swarms do not usually come from making every agent maximally general. They come from giving each one a sharper role. A planner that plans, a researcher that researches, a coder that builds, a verifier that checks, a coordinator that decides what happens next. That division is what creates signal. Otherwise, you are just multiplying noise. And that leads to a strange truth. The fantasy version of an AI swarm is complete autonomy. No humans need it. Just press go. The useful version is often more disciplined. Human sets the mission. Swarm breaks down the work. Agents execute in parallel. Verification happens. Uncertainty gets flagged. Human steps in at key checkpoints. That model is less glamorous, but it is much more believable. Because right now, the most effective agent swarms are not replacing judgment. They are compressing labor. They reduce search time. They reduce busywork. They reduce context switching. They reduce the friction between idea and output. That is a huge deal. If you are building products, researching markets, writing content, debugging software, processing documents, or coordinating internal operations, a well-designed swarm can make one person feel like a small team. And that is where this starts becoming economically disruptive. Not because the AI is magic, but because coordination creates throughput. A well-run swarm can take a vague objective and attack it from multiple angles at once. That is exactly what organizations pay teams to do. Which means the real question is not whether swarms are possible, they already are. The real question is who will deploy them well. Because the gap between a good swarm and a bad swarm is enormous. A good swarm feels focused, fast, and quietly impressive. A bad swarm feels noisy, bloated, and weirdly confident while getting basic things wrong. That gap is not just model quality, it is architecture. So when people say they are deploying an AI agent swarm, what they are really saying is something bigger. They are trying to move from using AI as a tool to using AI as an operating layer. A layer that can plan work, distribute work, execute work, inspect work, and return something that looks almost like team output. That is why this moment matters. We are no longer just talking to machines, we are starting to organize them. And once you start organizing machines, you get the same old human questions all over again. Who leads? Who checks? Who decides? Who is trusted? Who gets overridden? What happens when they disagree? What happens when they all confidently agree on the wrong thing? That last question is the one to remember. Because a swarm is not automatically wise just because it is plural. More agents do not guarantee more truth. Sometimes they just create more polished error. So yes, deploying an AI agent swarm can be a massive leap. It can unlock speed, parallelism, specialization, and serious output. But it also forces a new kind of responsibility. If you are going to command a digital workforce, you need to think like someone running an organization, not just someone testing a toy. That means structure over hype, design over chaos, verification over vibes. Because the real power of an AI swarm is not that it gives you more agents. It is that, if you build it properly, it gives you coordinated intelligence on demand. And if you build it badly, it gives you coordinated nonsense at scale. That is the difference. And that is why deploying an AI agent swarm might be one of the most important and misunderstood shifts happening in AI right now.